Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and his kingdom. Well, we are marking the great anniversary in this country of its founding at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the 4th of July. We are honored to be on the air on a wonderful network, Real America's Voice, to enjoy the fruits of liberty and to encourage all of our audience to not only relish them, but to assure we continue to have the opportunity to do so. In a dangerous world, fraught with enemies, foreign and domestic, I'm very proud to have as both a friend and valued colleague in the broadcasting business, a man who has become the president and CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters. He's our first guest. His name is Troy Miller. He's a Navy veteran and has therefore all the more reason to patriotically embrace this holiday. But he's also performing a very important service to the country by helping those who speak truthfully and faithfully about this nation, about the choices it faces, about the challenges we all encounter, to do that well and do it free of censorship, which many seem intent on imposing upon us. Again, both enemies, foreign and domestic. Troy Miller is the man that we will open the program with and begin our celebration of the 4th of July, and I can't think of a better individual to do that. Thank you, Troy, for joining us. It's great to have you with us, sir.
Thanks, Frank, for having me today.
I wanted to start, Troy, by asking you just to reflect, if you would, a bit, and in your own right, obviously, but also on behalf of your wonderful organization, about the importance of the 4th of July and a concern that I think we share, that your audiences apart, not enough Americans really appreciate what's been done to give us the liberties that we enjoy today and how perishable they are.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Frank. I think a lot of Americans don't understand the sacrifices that have been made over the history of this country, over the life of this country, to give us the freedoms that we are. And I also think that, this is a great day for us to reflect on, what the founding fathers really themselves sacrificed in order for us to have these freedoms, and what they held dear to themselves. They understood that our freedoms weren't granted by a king. They weren't granted by a monarchy or a government, that our freedoms were inherently given to us by our Creator. And that was really, if we think about it, that was the footing that they stood upon. That's the rock that they stood upon when they decided to stand against the British monarchy. And that's really the history of this country, is that we understand that the freedoms we have, the individual freedoms we have, are given to us. They are endowed to us by our Creator. They're not given to us by our government. And I think you said it right. The scariest thing today is we have a government that thinks they're in charge. They're the ones that grant these freedoms. I reflect back at, as you said, my time in the military and the Navy, and I just remember those 4th of July celebrations where we understood what we were doing, what our role was, and what the purpose of the Navy was for this country, to protect those freedoms, to protect those rights. Sometimes we don't like the rights the way some people use them, but they have the right to do that. And I think that's important for us to remember today.
Well, and especially so when we have a commander-in-chief who seems to be among those who either are indifferent to some of those rights, or worse yet, it seems, on some days at least, perfectly prepared to restrict them. And this brings me to a topic which I know is near and dear to your heart and that of your membership, Troy Miller, the censorship that has been, practiced by the Biden administration. It was the subject of a Supreme Court ruling just the other day, and I anxious to get your take on the implications of that ruling. But we saw the administration in the context of the COVID pandemic saying, well, certain information, certain data, certain opinions, certain speech had to be restricted because it did not conform to the party line about the nature of the disease, the nature of the best way to treat it, and other opinions that would deem to be mis or dis or even mal information. What are your thoughts on where we stand on this most important of, well, second only, I would argue, to freedom of religion, which is the first of the freedoms in the Bill of Rights? But freedom of speech, where are we on it, sir?
Yeah, I think we're in a pretty perilous state right now, freedom of religion. I think we were all disappointed that the court decided not to take up the case on the government colluding with these social media organizations. But I also think to remind that the government didn't rule on the merits of the case. They just kind of kicked the can down the road saying that there was no standing. So I think we're going to see this come back in front of the court. I don't think the court can dodge this for very long. But one thing out of it, I think we have to all understand, was the court and everybody else, you look at the case, nobody could say that the government didn't interfere with freedom of speech. The government certainly coerced these social media organizations to quelch any kind of, as you said, messaging that was contrary not only to the ideology that they hold, but contrary to the actions that they were taking. And I think that should frighten most Americans, that we have a government now today that if you hold any criticism of the actions that the government or the current administration is taking, that you're going to be silenced, and the government's going to feel a little more empowered that you're going to be silenced. And that's, again, why we're fighting so hard to keep Christian broadcasters, Christian communicators, churches, pastors, their ability to speak into the public sector. I think this government has no conscience about shutting down the free speech of Americans today. I think they wouldn't hesitate or blink in a second if they could do that and know they could get away with it. And that's frightening.
It is absolutely frightening, and thank you for what you're doing in this regard to push back on behalf of all of us, not just your own constituencies. But Troy, in that regard, let me just ask you about something that this administration was a prime mover behind, and that would be this so-called International Health Regulations Amendment Agreements. I call it a treaty because it's a internationally legally binding accord and therefore is a treaty and therefore should be considered by the United States Senate as a treaty. But the Biden administration has no intention of doing that. But they did have in mind getting the World Health Organization to require through this process the United States and all the other member nations of the WHO to adopt a mechanism for addressing, as they put it, addressing misinformation, disinformation, and I think they have in mind malinformation, which is too much truthful information, as it turns out. Your thoughts on this are so important because your members are going to be impacted, especially if this kind of thing were to become the supreme law of the land, and it might well do if we don't stop it. So we have to take a short break. We'll be right back with more with Troy Miller of the National Religious Broadcasters to get his response to all of this right after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Troy Miller's in the house, I'm pleased to say. He is the president and CEO of a very important organization based in Tennessee these days. It is the National Religious Broadcasters Association, NRB, and he does an important service, most obviously for the members of his community of broadcasters, but for the country as well, because I believe that what serves the interest of freedom of speech that NRB members engage in serves the people of this country. And it is important that we both take note of it and appreciate it on a day like the 4th of July, when those freedoms were first put in motion. Troy, you were, you know, talking a bit about the importance of course, our First Amendment rights. Freedom of religion, of course, goes even without saying, but freedom of speech as well. And your concerns about what the administration is doing to um, interfere with the free exercise of those liberties. I'm particularly concerned that they've just agreed to a new treaty that it appears would create a new international legal pretext for censoring us. And I wonder what your thoughts are on the advisability of allowing that to go down without a fight, and more to the point, get the Senate to reject this so-called International Health Regulations Treaty.
Right. We absolutely need to fight this in every capacity we can and get the Senate to reject it. Think about that first of all, as we talked about earlier, that we understand that our freedoms don't come from a government, and they certainly don't come from a World Health Organization, a globalist kind of group that doesn't understand that's going on in the country and has, in my opinion, different objectives that they're trying to achieve. And so the fact that they would now, and this is what we see often is the government here tries to use these kind of scare tactics and use this sort of what I call big brother. Look, they'll say, oh, the World Health Organization, because it sounds certainly important. It sounds like, oh, should be a great organization, a great entity. We're partnering with them as the globe around the world. This is something all the countries are coming together on, and you're right. That's puff it up and make this message sound like it's good. But what we really have is this, as you said, this extension that these globalists, these elitists who quite honestly have this attitude. The reason we call them elitists is because that's what they think. They think they know better what's better for you than you know what's for yourself. And they want to decide what is misinformation. I mean, I just think of all the organizations we have that do wonderful work around the world, missionary work, they do humanitarian work, they do social work around the world. What's going to happen to these organizations when the World Health Organization decides that their message is no longer in line in what they're doing? I mean, look at what the government recently did with Health and Human Services on adoption, to say that today you can't adopt unless you sign off to all the LGBTQ and transgender ideology. Is the World Health Organization going to now push that globally because that's an issue? That's exactly what will happen if this treaty goes through.
Again, you're a veteran of the United States Navy. You swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. What these guys are explicitly saying at the World Health Organization, of course, is that they're in the business of promoting global governance.
Mm-hmm.
And last time I checked, that's not the same thing as the kind of limited, accountable, representative, constitutional government that you've, wore the uniform to serve and you continue to support and defend in your current role. And all the more reason why we do agree. You need to join, and all of us need to join in fighting this affront to our Constitution, especially on the eve of the 4th of July. Let me ask you about one other aspect of the work that you and your team of religious broadcasters are deeply committed to, and rightly so, Troy, and that is another country, a country that very much shares our values, a country that has been, I think, formative in many ways of the values that we hold dear as well. And that, of course, is the ancient nation of Israel and now its current modern state. You were there not so long ago. I remember talking with mutual friends. You managed to contract some malady while you were there, unfortunately, but you were an important part of a delegation that was meeting at the highest levels of the Israeli government to demonstrate solidarity with them. Talk a little bit about how you and if you can, your team view what's going on with Israel at the moment, especially if you would, at a moment where it looks as though Israel will be confronting not just Hamas in Gaza, but in a very direct way, Hezbollah, the Iranian sort of foreign legion, if you will, in Lebanon and perhaps Iran itself.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. We on this trip was about solidarity and about information gathering. It was a fact finding trip. We were able to meet with just a number of people across Israel, rabbis, political figures, key individuals. But one day we actually went to Samaria, what the modern world likes to call the West Bank, and we spent time a whole day up in Samaria. And there's so much concentration, and there's still a lot going on in Gaza, and Israel needs to complete its mission in Gaza. But people don't understand the West is not reporting the truth. Every day we were there, Hezbollah was firing rockets into Israel, from Lebanon into Israel every single day. Over 100,000 people have been displaced from their homes in the northern part of Israel, and now are scattered throughout hotels all across Israel because of what's going on with Hezbollah. And to think that the American, and one of the messages we took to them is don't believe everything you see on American mainstream media. America and the church in particular stands strong with Israel. We had over 1,000 churches a month ago praying for Israel. And we have churches today and people across this country and Christian media getting the truth out, and we stand. That was a key message we brought to them.
God bless you for doing so. We have to leave it at that. Troy Miller, we're out of time. Come back to us with updates on all of this, if you would, sir. I beg your pardon. We're not out of time. We've got another 2 minutes. God bless you for conveying that message and doing so, as I'm sure you did, very powerfully. The thing is, it's not just your cohort of religious broadcasters that feel this way about Israel. By at least the polling that I've seen from the Harvard Harris team, something like 80% of Americans, are very solidly aligned with Israel against Hamas. And I'm pretty sure that would apply to its other enemies as well. To the extent that the U.S. government, though, is now increasingly demonstrating, I think day by day, not only its rabid hostility to Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, but also, an alignment with the idea that Hamas must survive, if not actually win in this battle with our most important ally. I mean, what was your takeaway on those counts, quickly, if you would?
Hey, Frank, I'm sorry, I lost the whole last sentence of you.
I beg your pardon. I was just asking, and we're almost out of time, but just very quickly, your sense of uh, the takeaway from Israel of what the U.S. government is doing, A, to their government, and B, aligning with Hamas.
Oh, yeah, sure. So that was a topic we did talk about, and again, the government feels, I think Israel's ready to handle this alone. I think Israel knows that they stand alone. They know that this government has turned on them, and that the government is really, as you said, they're enabling Hamas and enabling Hezbollah with some of the decisions that's gone on here. So
This is absolutely
key
crazy,
for us to
obviously.
tell them. Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah. It's bad for not just Israel, of course, but bad for us as well. We have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time today, Troy Miller, and the great work that you do at the National Religious Broadcasters. Come back to us with updates, if you would, in the near future.